Hanchard walked to the east for 5 days, and by the sixth it was clear that he was making his way to Weddon Prayers. The famous hill, where the fair was always held, was now empty of people. There were a few sheep about, but these ran off when Hanchard appeared. He put down his basket and remembered, with sad curiosity, what had happened there 25 years before, and what had become of him since. He found work as a haymaker again, and for some time thought no more of Casterbridge. But then one day news reached him of Elizabeth Jane's wedding, and he decided he could not stay away. He took 3 days to reach Casterbridge, arriving there the evening of the third day. On the second day, he had stopped in a town to look for a present for her. What should that present be? He walked up and down the street, looking in the shop windows. At length, a caged bird met his eye. He found he had enough money, and so he bought it. Then he continued on his journey. As he entered Casterbridge, he could hear the church bells ringing out their joyful news. Elizabeth Jane and Donald Farfrae were man and wife. A passer-by informed Henchard that they were entertaining guests and there were music and dancing at their house. Henchard made his way to Corn Street. His former house was well lit up, and a group of spectators were standing in front of it. His courage failed him. He could not enter there, so he went round to the back and came quietly into the house through the kitchen. But first he placed the bird in its cage under a bush outside to lessen the awkwardness of his arrival. Hanchard began to wish he had never come. He no longer belonged with all this gaiety and wealth. However, once in the kitchen, he was greeted with great friendliness by an old woman who seemed to be a kind of housekeeper. She was one of those people whom nothing surprises. When he asked her to go and tell the mistress that a humble old friend had come, she was quite happy to do so. Just as she reached the main room, a dance was started, and she returned to say that Mr. and Mrs. Farfrae were both dancing, but she would tell her mistress when the dance was finished. Hanchard could catch glimpses of what was happening through the open doors, but the gaiety did not suit his mood. He could not understand why Farfrae, a quiet man, should have had a band and all this merriment at his second marriage. Elizabeth Jane, too, he thought to himself, was quiet and gentle and rarely danced. He caught a glimpse of Elizabeth Jane, and his heart ached. She was dressed all in white, and the expression on her face was one of nervous pleasure rather than gaiety. She was not dancing with Farfrae. Suddenly, Hanchett saw her partner's face. It was nuisance. So he was the cause of all the gaiety. This man who had taken Henchard's place. Henchard pushed the door nearest him shut, and for some seconds made no other movement. He rose to his feet and wanted to go, but before he could leave, the dance had ended. The housekeeper had already told Elizabeth Jane of the stranger who was waiting for her, and there she was standing before him. Oh, it is Mr. Henchard, she said, starting back. What, Elizabeth Jane? He cried as he seized her hand. Oh, what do you say, Mr. Henchard? Don't say that. Call me worthless old Henchard, anything. But don't you be so cold as this. Oh, my dear, I see you have another, a real father in my place. Then you know all, but don't give all your thoughts to him. Save a little room for me. He blushed and gently drew her hand away. I could have loved you always. I would have gladly, she said. But how can I, when I know you have so bitterly deceived me? You persuaded me that my father was not my father, allowed me to live in ignorance of the truth for years. And then, when he, my warm hearted real father, came to find me, you cruelly sent him away, telling him of my death, which nearly broke his heart. Oh, how can I love as I once did a man who has done this to us? How could he tell her that he had been deceived about her himself until informed by her mother's letter that his own child had died and that his last lie had been because he loved her and needed her affection more than his own honor? Don't distress yourself because of me, he said, pride preventing him from pleading with her. I would not wish it at such a time as this, too. I have done wrong in coming to you, but it is only for once, so forgive it. I'll never trouble you again, Elizabeth Jane. No, not to my dying day. Good night, goodbye. Before Elizabeth Jane could say anything, Henchard had gone. One morning, Elizabeth Jane was making some rearrangements to one of the rooms in her new home when a maid came in saying, "Oh, please, ma'am, we know how that bird cage came there." Elizabeth Jane had discovered the cage with the bird dead from starvation inside it about a week after the wedding, but nobody knew how it had got there. The maid continued that farmer's man who called on the evening of the wedding, he was seen with it in his hand as he came up the street. This was enough to set Elizabeth Jane thinking, and she seized hold of the idea that the caged bird had been both a wedding gift from Henchard and his way of showing her he was sorry for the things he had done. Her heart softened towards that man, and she would not rest until she had persuaded her husband to search for him. It was not easy to discover where Henchard had gone, but at last Farfrae's inquiries set them on their way some 20 miles from Casterbridge. If it were not so far from Casterbridge, I should say that must be poor Whittle. It's just like him, said Elizabeth Jane, pointing at a man by the roadside. It might well be, said Donald, for he hasn't been at work these last 3 weeks, and I owe him for 2 days' work and don't know who to pay it to. The figure had run off towards a little cottage, so they followed and knocked at the door. It was indeed Abel Whittle. They had seen, for he answered their knock. He was very surprised to see them. "What are you doing here, Abel Whittle?" asked Farfrae. "Ah, sir, you see he was kind to my mother when she was alive, though he was rough to me." "Who are you talking about?" "Oh, sir, Mr. Henchard. Didn't you know he's just died about half an hour ago?" "Not dead," said Elizabeth Jane. "Yes, ma'am, he is gone. He was so kind to my mother, sending her good coal and potatoes and things that she needed. I saw him going down the street on the night of your wedding, and he looked so ill and tired. I followed him. He told me to go away more than once, but I still followed. Then he said, 'Whittle, why do you follow me when I have told you to go away so many times?' And I said, 'Because, sir, I see things are bad with you, and you were kind to my mother. Even if you were rough with me, and I want to be kind to you.' Then he didn't tell me to go away any more, and he walked all night. By morning, I could see he was quite exhausted, so I brought him for this empty cottage. What Whittle? He said, can you really care for such a person as I am? But he didn't gain strength, for you see, he wouldn't eat, and so he got weaker, and today he died. Dear me, is that so? Said Farfrey. As for Elizabeth Jane, she said nothing. He pinned a piece of paper with some writing on it above his bed. Continued Abel Whittle, but I can't read, so I don't know what it is. I can get it and show you. They stood in silence while he ran into the cottage, returning in a moment with a piece of paper. On it was written as follows: Michael Hencher's will, that Elizabeth Jane Farfrae should not be told of my death or made to grieve because of me, and that I should not be buried in a churchyard, and that no bells should be rung for me, and that nobody should see my dead body, and that nobody should walk behind my coffin, and that no flowers should be planted on my grave, and that no man should remember me. To this I put my name, Michael Henchard. What are we to do? Said Donald when he handed the paper to her. She could not answer. Oh, Donald, she said at last through her tears. What bitterness lies there! Oh, I would not have minded so much if it had not been for my unkindness at that last parting. But it cannot be altered now, so it must be.